Now that my Resident Evil retrospectives are all in the books, for the time being at least, this Halloween I want to move on to a new franchise of survival horror games that left a lasting impression on me. This is Dead Space. Unlike the long-running Resident Evil series that I initially had a non-existent relationship with, Dead Space was one I was heavily involved in from the moment it was conceived in 2008. I kept up with each new release that followed in what would make up a trilogy of games on the PlayStation 3. Dead Space is set in the 26th century, centering around protagonist Isaac Clarke, a starship engineer that gets pitted against hordes of undead mutant humanoids called necromorphs, and disposes of them using a vast array of futuristic weaponry. In the first two games, he explores claustrophobic environments within starships and space stations, and in the third one, even traverses an entire planet. Dead Space leans into more science fiction concepts, and its dark cosmic atmosphere is reminiscent of the Alien films, particularly that more intimate first one, making the player feel isolated and all alone. The thought that there is no help coming, and that no one can hear screams within the vacuum of space. The cover of the original game is iconic and encompasses all these ideas brilliantly, with a disembodied arm floating lifelessly among other debris. The OG Dead Space, developed by Redwood Shore's later Visceral Games, holds up incredibly well after all these years. I had beaten it about 4 or 5 times since it came out, on various difficulty levels. My last save for the game was from early 2013, before the release of Dead Space 3, so it had been over a decade since I played through the story last. Some of the puzzles had me scratching my head all over again. Many of the creature designs I came across were as unsettling as they were the first time I laid eyes on them, and almost all of the jump scares genuinely frightened me because I forgot when and where each one popped up. I found God a few times. Let's just leave it at that. The first Dead Space takes place in the year 2508. Humanity is on the verge of extinction due to a lack of valuable resources left on planet Earth. The surviving humans decide to venture out into the final frontier, using mining ships called planet crackers to find more resources and bring them back home. The oldest, largest, and most successful of the planet crackers is the USG Ishimura, which has been sending out a distress signal from the remote planet of Aegis 7, where it had been performing an illegal mining operation. Aboard a shuttle named the USG Kellyan, a maintenance crew consisting of Isaac, technologist Kendra Daniels, and security officer Zach Hammond are sent in to investigate the planet-cracking vessel. Communication from the Kellyan goes mysteriously unheard by the larger Ishimura, and a floating piece of space debris strikes the shuttle, causing its docking and autopilot to malfunction, and the ship crash lands within the Ishimura. Immediately, once they set foot on the ship, it becomes clear that something terrible has happened here. The Ishimura has been seemingly abandoned for reasons unknown. The Kellyan crew would come under attack by strange monsters, humans infected with some alien virus, with only Clarke, Daniels, and Hammond surviving the assault. Isaac would be sent to explore the Ishimura in the hopes of finding parts they can use to repair the Kellyan, but that too comes under attack by necromorphs and explodes, trapping them indefinitely on the Ishimura. I can't do the level of atmosphere in this game justice, it's simply amazing. While Dead Space 1 isn't my favorite of the series, that's Dead Space 2 with all the gameplay enhancements it made. I think DS1's story and atmosphere is the strongest these games ever had. The spaceship you walk around in is just plain eerie. You can always hear monster groans and roars in your vicinity. There are sounds of falling pipes and air ducks breaking. Even when out of combat, you feel petrified, and the world around you feels so alive, like it's breathing. I think not having Isaac talk in this one makes everything more immersive too, like you're in his shoes, and if you'd humor me, it allows the Ishimura to speak to you instead, which I think is much scarier. Dead Space was, and still is, fairly unique with how it ingeniously incorporates the heads-up display into the protective suit of the main character, so as not to clutter the screen and pull you out of the experience. Isaac's resource integration gear, or rig for short, visible on his back, shows you everything you need to know about his life signs at any given time. The amount of health he has runs up his spine, and the module for his stasis energy that allows him to slow down enemies or throw and move objects using telekinesis is located on his right shoulder blade. In zero-gravity sections within a vacuum, you also see a countdown timer which indicates how much oxygen he has left. Some of the tensest moments in Dead Space occur in these no-oxygen environments. It's when the survival aspect in these games is at its strongest, cranked up to 11. The best survival horror games involve the player managing their resources, things like health, ammunition, and inventory, but Dead Space takes it a step further and has the environment around you become a hazard at times. You can get so caught up in the action, puzzles you need to solve with stasis, or enemies popping out and attacking you, that you can lose track of Isaac's suit readings if you aren't careful. Health can be replenished using one of 3 sizes of medpack by simply pressing a face button, but you can also refill it as well as stasis and oxygen using the necessary items for them in your inventory, which doesn't pause the game, by the way. Keep that in mind during combat. Stasis and oxygen levels can also be restored by finding recharge stations scattered throughout the ship, and when you're out of resources, especially oxygen in a vacuum, a race to find one of these can be nerve-wracking, because it's literally life or death. The resource management in Dead Space is a lot of fun. I wouldn't say it's as difficult as survival horror games like Resident Evil can be, though. At least not in the standard difficulty setting. You frequently have access to a shop that acts as the merchant and inventory box from Resident Evil, all conveniently rolled into one. You can purchase any health or ammo you require if you haven't been able to track down enough yourself. You can sell any extra resources you have, or treasures you have found, and also bank any for later use if you want. New suit schematics you locate can be used to increase Isaac's armor and inventory capacity, and his rig and weapons can all be upgraded using valuable power nodes at workbenches. I say Dead Space is easier than Resident Evil on a base level, but that of course depends on which Resident Evil you are looking at. Dead Space can still be quite challenging on the harder difficulties, because you have to rely mostly on the shop for resources, and spending money restricts your ability to buy the better suits and weapons, making the game tougher and tougher the farther you get into it, and with lower oxygen levels, that means you can't fuck around as much in the vacuum sequences. You have to get in and get out as quickly as possible. The over-the-shoulder gunplay in Dead Space is great, and clearly it took inspiration, like many games of the time did, from Resident Evil 4, that had come out only a few short years prior. That said, it's not a bad thing, and Dead Space found a way to set its shooting mechanics apart from its contemporaries, and even to this day, still remains one of the series' more enjoyable elements. It focuses entirely on cutting off the limbs of the necromorphs. Shooting their bodies and even heads doesn't really hurt them, at least not as much. There's a sequence to take out each one, a precise step-by-step dissection, taking an arm off here, a leg there, and following it up with a few shots to their bodies or a direct one to their neck as they crawl around, severing their head from their torso. Lining up shots can be tricky sometimes in this game, because the environments can get really dark and the blue aiming beam doesn't stand out as much as it should from the glow of the flashlight. When the camera gets all shaky when you're being dragged around by a grab arm, for example, aiming can be even more strenuous and annoying. I have the same problems with throwing projectiles sometimes too. Even after all these years, the game can be very picky with the aiming, so take as much time as you can lining up your shots. The necromorphs in Dead Space can be really fucking aggressive, charging at you and leaping before striking and grabbing you. The main ones slash at Isaac with their bladed arms, but you've got others like the leapers that crawl over walls and look like humanoid scorpions with sharp tails. Pregnant necromorphs are fat ones that break open and release smaller creatures that crawl over you and drain your health within seconds if you get too close. You've got exploders that strike you with yellow sacks attached to their arms, filled with an explosive substance. Best to take these ones out from a distance. Lurkers are these little rotund assholes that jump around and crawl all over the place. They disperse 3 tentacles out of their backs that fire sharp little spears. They are pretty easy to kill. You can take out all of their tentacles in one fell swoop. Lurkers are the result of babies undergoing the necromorph transformation, which is unfortunate. Dividers are tall and slender necromorphs that mainly walk towards you, but are harder to hit with stasis and gunfire because their limbs are so skinny. As their name would suggest, they break apart when they die into smaller octopus-looking things. Brutes are the larger bastards that run at you like rhinoceroses. They have protective growths on their bodies. Freezing them with stasis and then attacking them from behind does the most damage. Twitchers are quite interesting. They are the result of a necromorph infecting someone with a built-in stasis module in their suit, fusing it and its abilities into the new tissue created, allowing the monster to move faster and more erratically. The sole purpose of the bat-like infectors is to turn living or deceased human corpses into necromorphs that spring back to life. The Guardians, they're just plain disgusting. A mass of flesh stuck to a wall that screams and moans when you get near it. They can only be killed by severing all of the tentacles that come out of it and attach to the wall behind it. They will constantly regrow themselves, so you have to be quick. Dispatching all of these ungodly abominations is a literal blast, with the variety of weapons Isaac has at his disposal. The list isn't that extensive, a total of 7 you can unlock, with the ability to assign 4 of them at once, but all of them, minus the flamethrower really, that I never use, serve a purpose and have their own unique charm. I should mention that each one has an alternate firing mode as well, but that too I rarely find myself using. The primary firing modes are more than effective alone. The pulse rifle is a rapid-fire assault rifle that I use to dispatch the smaller creepy crawlies and fast-moving enemies. The Ripper is fucking awesome. It releases a spinning saw blade that you can use to slice and dice any enemies that dare go near it. The contact beam is a powerful single beam of energy that you can charge up for increased damage. The force gun is like a shotgun that fires a quick, short-range blast that pushes enemies backwards. The line gun is one of my favorites. It fires a horizontal beam that can be widened with upgrades, one of the most useful when trying to cut off the limbs of necromorphs, but it does fire fairly slowly until you get enough upgrades for it. And of course, we have the starting weapon, the legendary plasma cutter. Fully upgraded, this gun is by far the best in this game, and the best in the entire series, among the default weapons at least. I'll explain later. Its firing speed, ammo capacity, horizontal and vertical shooting modes, every aspect of it is well balanced, highly functional, and it may be one of the greatest weapons in video game history in all honesty, as perfect and fun to use as can be. The USG Ishimura is broken up into several decks, all connected through a monorail system you ride in between each chapter of the story, some of which you revisit multiple times. After the destruction of the Kellyan, Isaac's goal is to locate the captain of the Ishimura, named Benjamin Mathias, to acquire his rig codes so you can access the higher security parts of the ship. Isaac finds the captain dead and is forced to take out the enhanced necromorph that is created from his corpse. You then reach the medical deck that has been barricaded by survivors. Very few of them you come across throughout the story. Most die from wounds they've suffered shortly after you approach them, are seen endlessly screaming or crying, having lost their minds, or decide to take their own life to end their waking nightmare. In Chapter 4, as you've been desperately searching for a way to get yourself, Daniels, and Hammond off the Ishimura, you have to activate the ship's asteroid defense system to keep it in one piece during a meteor shower. You have to manually pilot an asteroid cannon until Hammond can restore its automated tracking system. This is one of the most frustrating parts of the game for a lot of players. The controls are very awkward. You steer the cannon with the right analog stick, and fire with R1, which goes against all of your shooter sensibilities a bit. The game only lets you fuck up a few times too, so your accuracy needs to be pinpoint. I think a lot of people exaggerate the difficulty of the cannon sequence though. It's not as bad as it's made out to be. There is that achievement that has you keep the ship's shield above 50% throughout the entire section, which admittingly is tougher than frozen dog shit. But does anyone even hunt for those things anymore? Achievements? To be honest, I actually think the spacewalk leading up to the cannon is worse than the cannon itself. It's just overly long and kinda boring. All you do is hide behind these box things to avoid the falling asteroids. It feels like an eternity to get through it, at least when you make your way back after the cannon's tracking system has been initiated. You fight a bunch of leapers to keep you busy. You would come to learn that the hydroponics deck, which houses an internal farm that grows food for the workers aboard the Ishimura, has been infected by a large creature Isaac must poison and kill. The air there has also been polluted by necromorphs called Weezers, with disgusting sac-like growths on their backs. You take out all the Weezers, but the poison you create isn't enough to kill the larger Leviathan creature, and Isaac is forced to finish it off by himself in zero gravity. The Leviathan is an ugly mass of flesh with large tendrils. It spits these toxic boulders out of its mouth that you can throw back for damage. Choke on them, motherfucker! As you explore more of the Ishimura, you come to realize what has been causing this necromorph infestation. The mining the ship had been doing on Aegis 7 uncovered an alien obelisk called the Marker that emits powerful electromagnetic signals that cause dementia and psychosis within anyone that comes in contact with it. This marker, labeled Marker 3A, is actually an artificially created clone through reverse engineering that the original version, found several hundred years ago on Earth, had influenced the human race to fabricate, making them believe it would lead them to a bountiful source of energy, when in reality it just spreads the information required to make more markers and in turn more necromorphs across the cosmos. That's its true purpose. The extraterrestrial manipulation of the initial marker would give rise to a religion, a cult within humanity, called Unitology, that had funded the mining colony on Aegis 7, searching for the red marker. Unitologists believe that the symbols on the marker are a message that reveal the true meaning of human life, that humans will achieve immortality through rebirth after death, that the marker's knowledge will unite all of us into one body, one mind, and one voice, allowing humanity to transcend spiritually in an event called convergence. More on that in my reviews of Dead Space 2 and 3. While Isaac is tracking down and mixing the poison components to kill the Leviathan, he battles a monstrous creation of one Dr. Chalice Mercer, a scientist on the Ishimura and member of Unitology who became obsessed with the necromorphs and worships them like gods. Mercer views them as the future of the human species, that it's our destiny to evolve into them. He even ends up sacrificing himself to an infector in order to turn into one of them. That's nasty. Dr. Mercer had experimented on one of the miners who found the red marker, named Brant Harris, and implanted a piece of necromorph tissue directly into his brain in an attempt to unlock the marker's knowledge. This caused Harris's body and mind to break apart and undergo a unique transformation, turning him into the Hunter. The Hunter is kind of like the Tyrants, Mr. X and Nemesis from Resident Evil, in that it never seems to want to fucking die. It has the ability to regenerate any lost arms or legs you shoot off of it, which is why once you leave it a limbless torso on the ground, you'll want to hit it with stasis to slow the regeneration down, proceeding to run like the wind in the opposite direction. In Chapter 5, you defeat it by trapping it in a freezing chamber and having it shipped off to some dark, obscure corner of the Ishimura, but it returns in Chapter 10, hot on your tail, while you have to solve a puzzle of sliding walls to create a clear path to escape. It's the most nail-biting part of this entire game in my opinion. Makes me want to shit my pants from the anxiety. I can't think straight. When you finally get to melt the Hunter down to viscous goo with the exhaust of a space shuttle, it's extremely satisfying. You want to jump up and down and take a piss on its remains. Isaac would be sent to the mining deck to place a distress beacon on an asteroid housed there, before releasing it back into the unknown. A ship called the USM Valor, part of the Earth Defense Force, Earth's collective military, would respond to the SOS. The Valor's comms officer would tell Isaac and Kendra that they had located one of the Ishimura's escape pods, one that had been released earlier in the game by Hammond that unfortunately contained a trapped necromorph. The creature violently attacks all of the Marines aboard, kills the pilot, and the ship loses control, crashing into the Ishimura. Isaac would search the remains of the Valor for a singularity core to help power an executive shuttle found on the Ishimura by Hammond. Sadly, Hammond would meet his end on the Valor, being mauled to death by a brute. Isaac is able to survive the encounter with the brute and escape the Valor before it explodes. Isaac brings the Singularity Core to the shuttle, where he rendezvous with the Ishimura's chief science officer named Terrence Kyne. Dr. Kyne had been a member of the Church of Unitology, much like Dr. Mercer. However, when he discovered the horrific nature behind the fall of the colony on Aegis 7 after they had located the marker, and his warnings of bringing it onto the ship fell on deaf ears, he renounced the Church. Just like the rest of the crew on the Ishimura, though, Kyne succumbed to the psychological delusions created by the alien obelisk. He would hear the voice of his deceased wife Amelia, and would eventually start speaking to her as if she was standing right next to him. Amelia told her husband to return the marker to its pedestal on Aegis 7. It was the only way the necromorphs could be stopped and their hive mind neutralized. Isaac would team up with Dr. Kyne to achieve this. You locate the red marker and transport it onto the executive shuttle to be taken back to the planet's surface. When you return to Kyne near the shuttle, he is shot and killed by Kendra, who reveals herself to be an agent of the Earth government. During the early hours of the game, Kendra had been critical towards Hammond and made you believe he was the one hiding something, a classic red herring move. But it was Kendra who was the shady one. I think the twist is pretty effective and holds up rather well. EarthGov had wanted to retrieve the marker. Aegis 7 had been one big experiment orchestrated by them. The hive mind had been created due to the activation of the red marker on the planet. EarthGov intends to seal off the entire system. Logs you can find also state that the USG Valor had been sent in to destroy all traces of the Ishimura. So much like Umbrella in those earlier Resident Evil games, EarthGov looks to sweep everything they've done under the rug. Poor Isaac has had a rough time on the Ishimura. Things would only get worse for him, though. His girlfriend, Nicole Brennan, a senior medical officer on the ship, had sent him a recorded message saying things were falling apart there. She apologized for what had happened between them, wished she could talk to him, and said that she still loves him. Throughout this story, Isaac searches the Ishimura for Nicole and comes across her several times. She helps Isaac get the mining key on the mining deck, with you defending her from waves of necromorphs as she unlocks a door. Later, she helps you recall the executive shuttle housing the marker that Kendra had commandeered. Chapter 12, the final one of the game and my personal favorite, functions like a glorified escort mission, the best and most engaging in any video game I've played. You have Nicole speaking to you in the background, and while it can't be destroyed, you are essentially tasked with protecting the marker, carrying it with stasis back to its pedestal while fighting various necromorphs along the way. The focus you have on the artifact the entire time, how you flip from it to the necromorphs in combat and then back to the marker, makes for a very up-close and intimate experience. Escort missions typically involve other living, breathing characters, and not inanimate objects. But that's the thing, the marker feels alive. The fact that it's the cause behind all of this evil, all these psychological disturbances. It is a character in and of itself, one you grow closer and closer with as the game progresses. Isaac manages to overcome the odds and bring the red marker home, much like Isaac from the Bible that was meant to be sacrificed, but saved by God for doing good and believing in him. Isaac is saved as well, rewarded for his efforts. Nicole appears next to the marker, thanks him for everything, and declares them whole once again. Kendra would trap Isaac and steal back the marker, revealing that Isaac, much like Dr. Kyne, had been suffering from dementia. He had been seeing hallucinations of Nicole that the marker had created, tricking him into bringing it to the necromorph hive mind. Isaac had also been refusing to watch the rest of the recorded message from Nicole and accept her true fate. To avoid being turned into a necromorph, she had ended her own life through lethal injection. Her body was never recovered, but you wonder if possibly one of the necromorphs you killed throughout your journey on the Ishimura had been her. I know she killed herself, but this infecting organism reanimates corpses after all. You see it happen. I doubt Nicole's body would be any different. Anywho, the necromorph hive mind is awoken and takes its initial anger out on Kendra. She gets squashed by one of its tendrils and then hurled at a nearby wall. Hearing her life signs go dark is very cathartic. Am I a monster for thinking that?
Oh my god!
The boss fight against the hive mind to close off the story is great and highly memorable. I love its design, this massive worm-like monstrosity, a nexus organism consisting of God knows how many necromorph bodies. Its full length is undetermined because it had been hiding inside the core of the planet. It's got tentacles, teeth, and this nasty ribcage on its exterior that covers and protects its more tender bits. After Isaac defeats it, he flees Aegis 7 on Kendra's ship, and a large portion of the unstable planet that had been removed and had its gravity tethers destroyed by the energy of the marker crash lands, destroying the planet and the red marker along with it. As the shuttle carrying Isaac drifts through space, he finally has time for a breather and removes his helmet. His rest doesn't last long as he is attacked by another, more violent hallucination of Nicole as the screen fades to white and the credits roll. I can't put into words how much fun I had revisiting Dead Space. The original is one of my all-time favorite video games, and I think it's sacrilegious that it took me over 10 years to play it again. But I knew at some point I was going to cover it on my channel, so I just had to bide my time and wait. I'm glad I did. The game has aged like fine wine. While I don't consider Dead Space 1 to be the best in the series, from a gameplay perspective, it does remain the scariest and most atmospheric in my opinion. I think its story may be the most interesting and focused of the games as well, though as I am recording this, I have yet to rebeat Dead Space 2 and 3, so my thoughts on that may change. I've only played the third one once since it came out in 2013. I remember it being pretty bland and disappointing, so the only real competition Dead Space 1 has story-wise would be from its direct sequel most likely. But who knows, maybe after all this time and with a new set of eyes, Dead Space 3 may be better than I remember. Here's hoping. I guess I should quickly mention that there is a remake of Dead Space that was released earlier this year by EA's Motive Studio. As much fun as the game probably is, I don't have any interest in playing it whatsoever. I don't think enough console generations have passed to warrant a remake of Dead Space. The changes it makes in terms of graphics and gameplay look very trivial. The original is good as is. I wish there was a more conscious effort from publishers to preserve older games in their original forms, instead of an over-reliance on remakes like this that don't change enough to feel like a completely different experience. And on that sour note, I want to end this video. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my retrospective of Dead Space 1, and I hope you stick around in the coming days for my reviews of Dead Space 2 and 3. Let me know your thoughts on DS1 down in the comment section below. If you'd like to show your support to me and my channel and ensure the release of future content, you can do so by subscribing, sharing this video and others to anyone you know that would enjoy them, hit that bell icon for notifications, and by becoming a producer over on patreon.com if you can. I will see you all in the next one. Take care and stay nerdy.